Chapter 33 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger. A Story of Frontier Reform by Albert Bigelow Paine. Other work in East Texas. Districts which even a ranger finds hopeless. The Touchstone Murder. The Confession of A.B. Engel. It was only a short distance, as distances go in Texas, only 100 miles or so, in a southeasterly direction, from the Trans-Cedar country, made celebrated by the Humphrey lynching, to certain sections of Walker, Houston, Madison, and Trinity counties, where similar social conditions have developed. In Cottrell's Cutoff, for instance, and around Groveton, there has developed a special talent for assassination. Men walking along the road in daylight are sometimes shot from behind. When it is nightfall, the assassin may lie in wait by the roadside. If he gets the wrong man by mistake, it is no difference. It keeps him in practice. Sometimes the victim is called to his door at night and shot down from the dark. These are a few of the methods for removing individuals not favorably regarded by the active set, and many other forms of murder are adopted or invented for particular cases. Even Captain Bill McDonald found these districts hopeless as fields for reform, he said. If a whole community has no use for law and order, it's not worthwhile to try to enforce such things. You've got to stand over a place like that with a gun to make it behave, and when you catch a man, no matter what the evidence is against him, they'll turn him loose. In Groveton, for instance, when I was there, they had only 2 law-respecting officers, the district clerk and the county attorney they killed. Good citizens were so completely in the minority that they were helpless. Cottrell's Cutoff was probably one of the most lawless places you could find anywhere, though it was named after a judge. It's a strip, cut off of Houston and Trinity counties, and added to Walker, and its name is the only thing about it that ever had anything to do with the law. Many murders have been committed there, and no one ever convicted for them, so far as I know. Captain Bill was ordered to investigate a Cottrell's Cutoff murder during December 1903. A man had been assassinated from ambush in the fashion of that section, and such attempts as had been made by the local authorities to uncover the murderers had been without result. But such murders had become so common there that the few respectable citizens of the locality had decided to appeal to Governor Lanham for aid, and their plea asked especially for Captain McDonald. McDonald went down, looked over the ground, and sent for one of his men, Blaze Delling, to assist in handling the situation, the community being simply infested with men of low, desperate natures. Already the ranger captain had taken up the trail and had arrested 3 men, and these were brought for trial. What was the use? Before the final trial, the 3 principal witnesses suddenly sickened and died. The district attorney found himself without a case. The prisoners were discharged. It was about this time that County Attorney H. L. Robb, himself a victim later, asked that Captain McDonald be sent to Groveton in Trinity County to unravel the mystery surrounding the murder of an old lady, committed about a year before. Captain Bill went reluctantly, for he was tired of that section and cared not much for a cold trail at best. On arrival at Groveton, he learned the facts so far as known. A feeble old lady named Touchstone, living alone, had been murdered for a stocking full of money supposed to be hidden somewhere on the premises. She had only a life interest in the money, anyway, but the heirs to her trifling hoard, of probably not more than a few $100s, had been impatient and had frequently demanded their shares. They were a devilish brood, but the old lady did not seem to fear them and carried a stout stick for defense. She had been found murdered, one afternoon, her throat cut, and her body left lying in the dooryard, where it had been mangled by hogs. Naturally, the relatives were suspected, but thus far no evidence had been found against them. There was evidence enough, however, for a man who had eyes trained to follow clues and to distinguish signs. In a comparatively brief time, Captain McDonald felt warranted in causing the arrest of one Abe Engel and several others. Engel had married a granddaughter of the murdered woman, and all were relatives. In the course of time, Engel's heart failed him, and he confessed the crime in full. In his sworn statement he said, "We all talked the matter over about going and robbing Mary Jane, Mrs. Touchstone, and Hilhudo said, 'Let's have an understanding. George Engel, Wash, and Joe Tullis, Hilhudo and Mrs. Tullis, and myself, all relatives, were to meet over at Mary Jane's to see where she kept the money, and to get it. That was our intention, to get the money on Saturday night. Hilhudo was to be there when we got there. It was just dark when we got started, and we went through the fields in an easterly direction in a trail through the woods. The understanding was that Joe Tullis and I were to do the watching, and Joe was on one end of the gallery, and I was on the other end, he being told to watch the east end of the road, and I to watch the west end. Hilhudo was to be there, talking to Mary Jane, while George Engel and Mrs. Tullis were to go in at the front, and Wash was to go in at the back of the house. She, Mrs. Touchstone, had some meal spread out on the floor to dry. She was sitting down, I do not know on what, talking to Hill. Mrs. Tullis said, "Mary Jane, we have come to see whether you have that money yet or not." Mary Jane started to get up, but Hilhudo, George Engel, Wash Tullis, and Mrs. Tullis grabbed her and carried her out on the gallery and told me and Joe to watch the road good, and we told her, Mrs. Tullis, we would, as far as we could see. She, Mrs. Touchstone, started to holler, but Wash put a handkerchief over her mouth. He had a white handkerchief in his right coat pocket. The confession then relates how they put out the fire, fearing its light, by throwing a bucket of water on it, and how they jerked off a bonnet which the old lady had on. It proceeds: They, her precious relatives, carried her to the edge of the gallery and asked her to say where the money was, and she said she did not have any, and they pushed her off, and as they pushed her off, Hilhudo struck her with a stick. It was at this point, probably, that they cut their victim's throat. A detail which Engel's confession does not mention, through delicacy, perhaps. He says, "They went out and examined her, going through her clothes carefully, in search for her possessions. Hilhudo, Wash Tullis, George Engel, and Mrs. Tullis did the examining, and they got 1/2 and 1/4 of a dollar. George Engel and Wash Tullis spent the money. Hilhudo, Wash Tullis, George Engel, and Mrs. Tullis looked over the house and went through the trunks in the bed. If they got any money, I do not know of it. They came out of the house and looked under the house to see if they could find any dirt dug up or any fresh signs, but they could not find any, and we went out at the west end of the gallery and climbed over the fence and took the trail through the fields, and Hill went the back way. Many half-burnt matches were found under the house by Rangers McDonald and Delling to confirm this statement. The confession proceeds: The stick and the bucket were thrown out near where she was. The stick was her walking stick, and the bucket the one Wash put the fire out with. Hill threw the stick out, and Wash threw out the bucket. Hill said he would leave the bucket out there, and the people would think she had just went out to slaughter the hogs, and fell out. It was understood that night by all 6 of us, that Wash and George would come back and get the hogs in there, and that they would dig a hole on the left of the gate as you go in." He details how Wash Tullis and George Angle changed their shirts before breakfast, for the removal of ghastly evidence, of course, and how, after breakfast, they changed their trousers. He relates how the hogs were to be "told into the yard," and adds, "The understanding was that we were to find her by the buzzards, but Jim Ray found her before the time." Now, it would be natural to suppose that a confession like that would hang the confessor and his confederates as high as Haman. It did nothing of the sort. Angle's relatives prevailed upon him to retract his confession, and under the law, as administered in that district, they were all discharged except Angle himself, who was sentenced for 3 years for having committed perjury by swearing to a confession which he subsequently declared a lie. It is hardly to be wondered at that men like Bill McDonald should lose interest in a neighborhood where conditions like these exist. What use is it to track and bring home criminals only to see them go free, perhaps vowing vengeance against their captors? A detective was assassinated in Groveton, and Ranger Dunaway, on invitation of Attorney Robb, went over to look into the matter. On their way to the courthouse, both Robb and Dunaway were fired upon from the window of a law office. Dunaway was severely wounded, and Robb, fatally injured, lived but a short time. It would be monotonous to detail the instances of crime and of the captures made in the neighborhood of Groveton, Madisonville, and neighboring communities, to record the careful and brave work of Captain McDonald and his Rangers, which led only to failure in the end, through the lack of public and official cooperation. When the men who administer the law, and a controlling number of the citizens, do not want justice, then perhaps it is just as well that law-abiding citizens should move away and let the rest murder one another to their heart's content. A father and son waylaid and killed an old man named Tummins in Madison County, and were arrested single-handed by Captain Bill. The 2 were discharged on the plea of self-defense. A young man by the name of Hunter Gibbs was entrapped and assassinated near Madisonville, and his murderers were traced home and arrested by McDonald and his Rangers. They were eventually discharged. A man named Wright Terry, this was in Groveton, after killing an officer and a doctor, and nearly killing a drummer, was brought to book by Captain Bill, and might have gone free, like the others, if he hadn't, good-naturedly, agreed to plead guilty and take a life sentence, rather than discommode his friends. But enough, let us turn to pleasanter things. End of chapter 33, read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, January 15, 2022.